Hi, everybody. This is incredible. I love seeing where everyone is calling in from, and thank you to My Jewish Learning for this incredible opportunity to connect across the world through prayer, through liturgy, through the ways that we reach out beyond ourselves to something greater, and the ways that we reach deep within ourselves to find that spark that is within each and every one of us. I'm excited to talk about the Shema today, and I would say, and I'm going to caveat this by saying, I bet every teacher who teaches on their prayer says, this prayer is the most foundational prayer in Jewish tradition. So it's not a contest, but the Shema is perhaps the most important, most central prayer in Jewish tradition. And as with every prayer that's been explored in this series, there are entire books written about the Shema. And I'll just start by showing this one, which maybe some of you have, but the My People's Prayer Book series is incredible if you're looking to dive deeper into prayer. And there's one of the volumes is all on the Shema. So while I am not a Shema expert, I am a Shema lover and excited to share with you what I know about the Shema and some texts and some poetry during our class today, and invite you to dive into that book and others to learn more after as well. So I'll start by saying that, and I'm calling in from Berkeley, California, and it's really great to be with you all, and nice to have some friends on the call too, and to see many new faces. So the Shema can refer to multiple things. It can refer to the 6 words that start Shema Yisrael from Deuteronomy. It can also refer to 3 sections of text from the Torah that are put together as the full Shema. It's Shema Yisrael and the Ve'ahavta, and you shall love God with all your heart. And then what is often called the yoke of the commandments in Hebrew, that starts V'haya im Shemoah, which is a section from Deuteronomy that details the consequences that will arise if we don't live in alignment with the commandments. And then the 3rd section is on tzitzit, on the fringe corners of our garments, from Numbers, actually, from another book in the Torah, that we're commanded to wear on our garments. So these paragraphs are all from Torah, but they don't appear consecutively in Torah. The full Shema, as we have it now, was pieced together. These different sections were pieced together by the rabbis. And for today, we're just going to focus on the 6 words of the Shema. We're going to do a really deep dive into these words and see what meaning we can draw, what insight, what connection from just these 6 words. And I'll say I'm going to share sort of my own theological connection to these words, and just as always, that is just one offering, and there are many ways to translate and understand these words. So see if what I says resonates with you, and if not, think about other ways that you might translate or understand these words. Before we start, I would love, just because we have folks from all over the world, and you probably have lots of associations with the Shema, I feel like I would love to see in chat just do you have an association? If you do, what's one association you have with the Shema? Did you learn it as a kid? Do you say it at night before bed? Well, I'll just wait for a couple folks to drop in chat and just see, do you have any connection to the Shema? What's your connection? Awesome. Yeah, daily and nightly prayer. Yeah, sing it to your kids every night as you put them to sleep. Try to say it daily. Yep. Yes, Barbara, it's the watchword of our people. I've always wondered exactly what that phrase means, but that's definitely a phrase that we have. Yep, learned it in Hebrew school. If you went to Hebrew school. Yeah, for some of us, that's the only prayer that we know from memory and can recite. It's about belonging, it's about listening, it's about God. Yeah, it can be a really serious moment in the liturgy. Yeah, Eden, it's taking these lines of Torah. It's funny that we're talking about this as a prayer. It really is a prayer, but it's actually lines from Torah that have become a prayer. So it's both. Waking up, yeah, deathbed. Yeah, we're going to talk about how the Shema bookends both our day and our lifetime. And that's one of the reasons I think it's such a powerful and important prayer. Wow, these are incredible. Okay, I'm obviously not going to be able to read through all of these, but I hope y'all scroll through these as I'm talking. Yeah, covering eyes. Maybe we sit and cover eyes. Maybe we stand and cover eyes. We're going to talk about posture for saying the Shema. These are beautiful. Thank you all. Okay, so I'm going to move into, Julie, do you want to share some slides just to help folks follow along? And happy to share these, of course, afterwards. And I can also add some of the text that I don't have on each slide because it was too much words. I can also share those after too. So to set the stage, I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday and hearing a recitation of a Rilke poem that was translated by Anita Barrows and Joanna Macy. And it made me think of the Shema. It's from a poem called You Are the Future. And it says, you are the future, the red sky before sunrise over the fields of time. You are the cock's crow when night is done. You are the dew and the bells of matins, maiden, stranger, mother, death. You create yourself in ever-changing shapes that rise from the stuff of our days, unsung, unmourned, undescribed, like a forest we never knew. You are the deep innerness of all things, the last word that can never be spoken. To each of us, you reveal yourself differently, to the ship as coastline, to the shore as ship. So for me, these words evoke so much of what I find meaningful and powerful and potent in the 6 words of the Shema. This poem is obviously very evocative, and I want to kind of dive into these words now and see how they connect. So next slide, Julie. Great, and next one. Thank you so much. And maybe next one, number 4. Perfect, thank you. So here are the 6 words so that you can see them. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So often translated as, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the translation of the Shema I grew up with. And if you have others, please start putting them in chat also. And we're really going to expand our definition and understandings of each of these words in the next little bit of time. So for some, the Shema is like a powerful declaration of monotheism. As Jews, we don't worship many gods. As you know, when sort of Judaism was nascent and being formed, the surrounding cultures may have at one time. This was an assertion that we worship one God. It is, some say, an essential declaration of Jewish faith, as someone put in chat, sort of the watchword of our faith. For others, it's a declaration that God is all-powerful, above all our earthly rulers. God is the one whom we serve. For others, the focus, as some of you wrote in chat, is on the importance of the act of listening. And for others, it's about the oneness of the entire universe and the interconnection of life. So I offer these to say that, as with any Jewish prayer, I think what's most powerful are the multiple layers of interpretation and meaning that have accrued on this text or practice over time, and that it can mean different things to different people, and also different things to each of us on different days or at different moments in our day. And I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about the Hebrew language and about Jewish tradition, that we're invited to read multiple meanings into text. And I think that our sacred texts, and this prayer being one of them, have stood the test of time because they had that elasticity, that we can direct towards them and find within them what we need given the time and the situation that we're living in. So as we go through these possible translations and explanations of the words, I invite you to ask yourself, like, what are the most meaningful understandings of this prayer for you right now, given this moment of our world, this moment in your personal life? So let's dive in. Julie, next slide, please. Thank you so much. Okay, oh, Shema, yeah, perfect. So we have the first word, Shema, which is hear or listen. This word is like commanding us, right, to listen. And I find it particularly powerful that when I say it, it's both a word being spoken to me, to any of us saying the prayer, and as we're speaking it, we are also kind of speaking it to others, like Shema, listen. So we should listen, others should listen. When we recite these words in a congregation or community alongside one another, we're all being told to listen and reminding one another to do the same, that we're all calling on each other to open our ears and to open our hearts. And if any of you went to a Jewish preschool or had a kid or know a kid who's in a Jewish preschool, my 4-year-old recently taught me from his preschool that he's like, Mama, Shema starts with shh. So reminding us that we've got to get quiet, right, before we listen. And what are the ways that we listen? There's so many different ways. It's not just our ears. I saw someone putting, like, right, there are folks who are deaf. There are all different ways that we open ourselves to listening. So Shema begins with an imperative to listen, and just that word alone is a powerful call, I think. And to say that listening is not an easy thing to do. More than the simple act of just hearing, true listening requires us to open ourselves to one another's experience so that heart touches heart and that we have the possibility of being changed. To bring in Martin Buber, the philosopher's framework, it's what allows us to develop that I-thou relationship rather than I-it. Buber describes listening as something we do with our full selves, with all parts of ourselves, or all parts of ourselves that are available to us, and sensing and feeling what another's trying to convey so that we can remove the barrier between us. So in Judaism, this act of listening is the key to unlocking bounty and blessing. In Deuteronomy, one of the books of the Torah, as the Israelites kind of wind down their wandering in the wilderness and prepare to enter the land of Israel, Moses instructs them emphatically, using this exact same word, Shema. He says, if you listen, truly listen, Moses says, good things will come. So just emphasizing this importance of this first word, Shema, listen. And I wanted to bring in this text from the Hasidic commentator, the Sfat Emet, who references a line from rabbinic commentary that says, happy are the ones whose listenings are to me, from Jewish text. And then he adds his own commentary saying, listenings means that one should always be prepared to receive and listen closely to the words of God, since the voice of God's word is in everything, since we're all created in God's utterance. So what are the ways that we listen? What are the ways that we open ourselves, prepare ourselves, ready ourselves to listen? One other text from Jewish tradition on listening, just as I was preparing for this, that got me excited. The rabbinic commentary Devarim Rabbah says there are 248 major body parts, but it's through the ear, I think emphasizing listening here, that they live, saying, listen and you will be alive. And so again, saying we can listen through all different parts of ourselves, I think, but it's listening that allows us to come alive. Next slide, Julie. Thank you. And then this close exploration of this first word, Shema, listen, and then we're going to move on to the next word in just a moment. I wanted to intersperse this presentation with some poetry. So I wanted to bring this beautiful piece, I think, by the American nature writer Annie Dillard from Teaching a Stone to Talk, Expeditions and Encounters. And she says, at a certain point, you say to the woods, to the sea, to the mountains, the world, now I am ready. Now I will stop and be wholly attentive. You empty yourself and wait, listening. After a time, you hear it. There's nothing there. There's nothing but those things only, those created objects, discrete, growing or holding or swaying, being rained on or raining, held, flooding or ebbing, standing or spread. You feel the world's word as attention, a hum, a single chorus note everywhere the same. This is it. This hum is the silence. Nature does utter a peep, just this one. The birds and insects, the meadows and swamps and rivers and stones and mountains and clouds, they all do it. They all don't do it. There is a vibrancy to the silence, a suppression as if someone were gagging the world, but you wait, you give your life's length to listening. And nothing happens. The ice rolls up, the ice rolls back, and still that single note obtains. The tension or lack of it is intolerable. The silence is not actually suppression. Instead, it is all there is. So I just love the bringing in this metaphors and I want to just put in chat, wait, the book in case anyone wants to read it, of Annie Dillard. These resonances of nature and how nature also has its own ways of listening, and that even when things seem silent around us, there is something to be listened to. So I think Shema invites us into the silence, which is the voice of everything. Okay, next slide, Julie, thank you. So the next slide. So Shema Yisrael. So Yisrael, or Israel. This word for me evokes our patriarch Jacob, whose name was changed to Yisrael, to Israel, after his night wrestling with the angel. Jacob's struggle that night, we might see him as wrestling with God, or even as wrestling with his own deepest self, right? The story is after stealing the birthright blessing from his brother Esau, Jacob flees, runs away from home, and this wrestling match happens on his way to reunite with his brother again for the first time since his fateful actions. He's on the banks of the Yabok River. He sends his family and all of the possessions he's accrued across to one side of the river, and then back one side, yeah, and then remains alone on the other side and wrestles with this angel until dawn. And then as dawn breaks, the angel renames Jacob and tells him that his new name is Israel, for he has struggled. When we say the word Yisrael in the Shema, I want to offer that we're calling on this ancestral name. We're calling upon it and we're taking it upon ourselves. We are all God wrestlers, right? We, like Jacob, have all had times in our life when we must encounter ourselves and God and struggle with who we are and what we believe and how to make repair. And so just as the Shema is both a command to others and to ourselves to listen and hear, here we're calling both ourselves and each other Yisrael, God wrestlers. So we might understand it as saying, listen up, all you who struggle with God. So with this, we invite everyone, really, all parts of ourselves and everyone in our community in, for who hasn't struggled at some point in our lives with God. And just to say that it's this doubting, this questioning, this lack of surety, and this discerning self that we want to welcome and bring in. With me so far? Yeah, okay, awesome. Next word, speaking of God. So in the Shema, we say Shema Yisrael Adonai. So we pronounce this word that you see in Hebrew on the screen as Adonai, meaning Lord. But that is a stand-in, right, for the word itself. The word, if you know the Hebrew letters, the letters that are there are Yud, He, Vav, He. And this is God's name. It's an impossible conjugation, or like mixing up of the letters from the verb to be, is, was, will be. Some offer that we say Adonai in the place of this word, Yud He Vav He, because we're meant not to ever pronounce God's most sacred name, right? But I came across this beautiful explanation from Rabbi Arthur Waskow of the Shalom Center, and he gives another explanation. And he says, I'll quote him because it's just so beautiful, that this word is unpronounceable not because we're forbidden to pronounce it. That understanding is, in my view, he says, a way of avoiding the deeper truth. But because if one tries to do so, pronouncing these four strange letters, semi-vowels, semi-consonants, linguists call them aspirate consonants without any vowels. If we tried to pronounce the consonant letters of this word without the vowels, one simply breathes. If the sh of the Shema is a call to quiet and to listen, Yisrael orients us in the fullness of ourselves in our community, then this word, this Yud He Vav He, calls out to God through the movement of our breath, the movement of life force energy into us and out of us, right? Breath is the way that we profoundly and continually reciprocate with the natural world around us. Our exhale is the inhale of trees and plankton. Our inhale is their exhale. So we breathe each other into life, and God breathes life into all of us. We can just try that for a minute together. Just take a breath in and a breath out. And sometimes that act of taking an intentional breath can be so challenging, and sometimes it's just also that simple to coming back into relationship with ourselves and into the moment. So I'll just say one more thing about this name for God. We know in Jewish tradition that God has many, many names, right? Adonai, Melech, King, Sur, which means rock, Shaddayim, mountains or breasts, Elohim, God, Tzivaot, hosts, the list goes on and on. We could say that there's like 100 names for God. There are many ways that we call upon God and many names that we use depending on what quality of God we want to access or draw forth. Because in truth, God is infinite. And it's upon us, I think, my theology, to determine what aspects, what elements, what characteristics of the divine we seek to bring forth into the world. So here, Yod He Vav He connects us to the past, to the present, and to the future, and to breath, that constant flow of life that moves through us and connects us to the rest of the world. And I'll end this slide on just one more piece from Rabbi Waskow, who says, Moreover, it makes profound sense for at least one of the real names of the real God to be not a Hebrew word, nor an Egyptian, or a Latin, or Greek, or Arabic, or Sanskrit, or English, not in any single language, but in all of them, or in some form of expression that both underlies and transcends language. Just breathing, which all humans of all peoples do. Yod He Vav He, breath, is, was, will be. This force underlies all life. Can go to the next slide. Just checking the chat. Yes, I'll make all these sources available for sure. Okay, so next word, Eloheinu. So here we're saying our God, Eloheinu, the nu on the end, that Hebrew ending means ours, right? So we're saying, listen up, you God wrestlers, the breath of all being, the force of life that permeates everything is our God. So this is through all our names and texts and prayers and rituals, who we're reaching out to. This force, this breath, this energy is our God. Julie, next slide. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to draw that together with these words that we end with Adonai Echad. So Yod He Vav He, that breath, life force of the universe that we call God, is both the force that we uniquely connect to as our God through Jewish text and ritual and prayer and ancestry and tradition, that we call Eloheinu, the one we claim as ours, and that very same Yod He Vav He force is one. Echad means one. It is what flows through and connects everything. I was doing some research on one and this word echad and its prominence and significance in Jewish tradition. And I came across a beautiful 1997 sermon, drash, that Rabbi Harold Schulweis wrote for Rosh Hashanah. His drash was called Echad. His sermon was called Echad. And I'll send this text out after so you have it. He writes that Echad is the golden thread running through Jewish spirituality. Echad is the magnet that draws together all of the fillings of our belief system and holds it together. Echad is the singular attribute ascribed to God. And then he actually goes to the Shema. He says, it does not say, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is omnipotent, or the Lord our God is omniscient, or the Lord our God is eternal. It says, the Lord our God is Echad, is one. As the Zohar puts it, if you isolate any of the attributes of God, wisdom, mercy, justice, and deify, you turn God into an idol. God is whole. God is entire. Echad is one. And he says echad, but not one in the mathematical sense. One as opposed to two, or as opposed to three, or as opposed to 20. He says to believe in echad is to understand God as the great connection, the nexus, the binding that links me and you within the great chain of being. To recognize God as echad, he says, is to believe that everything and everyone is connected and that we all belong to each other. And in the deepest spiritual sense, that we are all of us cosmically connected. To believe in echad is to know that nothing is isolated. And Schulweis goes on to say that this echad, this oneness, doesn't mean passivity or resignation, but rather it demands activism. To know that we're partners with God in bringing about a world of more justice and love and connection and equality and opportunity and safety and creativity and peace. So I think at these, especially very challenging times, it can be hard to live into and feel that oneness and interconnection. And when we do feel into it, it's even more painful to feel the ways that we're interconnected. And it's an incredible opportunity, I think. So next slide, Julie. So bringing back all the words here together again, Shema Yisrael, Yod He Vav He, or Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So beginning with listening and ending with oneness, the Shema invites us to deepen our capacity to listen to ourselves, to the divine, to those around us, and to develop this I-thou relationship with the divine and with the rest of humanity. And its daily recitation reminds us to build bridges, I think, rather than barriers in the places that we are able, so that we can touch upon, even if it's just for really brief moments of time, even if just for a micro instant, that knowing or that place in which we really are all one. So next slide, that is our deep dive into the words. And I'm sorry that I can't respond and like see all of the chats, but I'm going to go back in a few and look at all of these. I want to move sort of from those words and from that understanding to some other elements about the Shema. So some of the physical practices for recitation of the Shema. So growing up, I grew up in a Reform synagogue, and the practice I grew up with was to stand and recite the Shema. And we stood, I learned, because reciting the Shema is, standing to recite the Shema is indicating the importance and the seriousness of this prayer, almost like rising before a king to take on the responsibility of our role in serving this majestic force of the universe. Or others teach it's to stand the way we would stand to give testimony, as one would stand to do so in a courtroom. For others, the Shema is recited always while seated. And for most, we cover our eyes when we recite the Shema. Perhaps in order to fully concentrate on the words that we're saying and to internalize the meaning of the words, perhaps to not let our eyes land on any one thing and mistake that one thing for God. And that it's some folks' custom to enunciate the Daled, that very last letter of the word echad, very specifically, because without that, folks are afraid that that word could be confused with another Hebrew word, the word acher, which means other. A Daled can sometimes look like a resh, that d, the letter that makes the d sound with the letter that makes the r sound. So we want to make sure we're saying God is one as opposed to God is other. So you might hear folks say like echad and really enunciate that Daled. And if you want to put in chat, if there's a reason or like a meaning that you've read into or found for yourself in the posture that you take when you recite the Shema, please put that into chat. What does it mean for you to cover your eyes, to sit or to stand when you say Shema? And then Julie, next slide. Thank you. Back one, I think. Oh, next one, yeah, okay, perfect. So Shema and the life cycle and the day cycle and the year cycle. So a lot of you wrote about this when we put in the chat at the beginning, connections to the Shema. If you have learned or have a practice of reciting prayers, the Shema is likely the first prayer that you learned to say, and it was the first prayer I learned to say. It's recited twice daily at the morning and the evening prayer service, which is following the biblical instruction from Deuteronomy to say these words when you lie down and when you rise up. And when I think of the Shema, I think of my childhood. These 6 words were almost like a mantra that I recited every night before bed so that they would be the last words on my lips before falling asleep. And now with 2 young children, I think of my kids and being a parent of them, we recite the Shema every night, as a number of you said that you also do each night before bed with them. The Talmud recounts this teaching that Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai that even if a person recited only the recitation of the Shema in the morning and evening, meaning like missed all the other prayers and just was able to do the Shema, they fulfilled the mitzvah of bringing the Torah, this verse from Joshua, this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth. So the Shema sort of like, if we can just do that, that can be enough sometimes. So in many ways, as we said at the beginning, not to compete with the other prayers, but it's in many ways the ultimate or the most important of all the prayers. Next slide, Julie, slide 14. Thank you. So Shema is the prayer that opens and closes our day, just as it opens and closes our life. So as I said, often it's the first prayer that we learn as kids, or whenever we learn prayers. And it's also meant to be the last prayer that we say before our souls leave this world. This tradition ties to a Talmudic legend which recounts that before Jacob's death, his sons gathered around his deathbed and together they declared the first verse of Shema Yisrael, these 6 words that we're saying. That is not found in Torah, but it's found in the Talmud, in a rabbinic story, in a rabbinic imagining. The Shema is a central part of the vidui, which is the deathbed confessional. This is a confessional that we also recite all together as a community on Yom Kippur. And when we feel death approaching, we are to recite the vidui, this confessional, as a way of, these are the words of Anita Diamond, as she teaches in her book, Saying Kaddish, to acknowledge our imperfections and make a final reconciliation with God. And she goes on to write that the Shema is the last thing a Jew is supposed to say before death, which is also why it's recited before going to sleep at night in case I should die before I wake. And that the Shema is not a petitionary prayer. We're not asking for something, nor is it a prayer of praise. We're not praising God. And as we talked about at the beginning, it's not really a prayer at all, but rather the proclamation of God's oneness. And it's also an affirmation of Jewish identity and connection. So the Shema ends, as we said, with that word echad, that word which means one. And so uttered with this dying breath, she says, it suggests the ultimate reconciliation of the soul with the Holy One of blessing, echad, whom all Jews also call Adonai. Next slide, Julie. Getting towards the end, so I just have a few more and then we can open it up. This is on the timing and the importance of the Shema. So as I said, Shema is clearly very important, said twice daily to open and close our days and also to open and close our lives. It's also the text that is on the scroll of the mezuzah, which we put on the doorposts of our house to remind us of these words as we move in and out of our homes and from one room to another. The Shema in many ways helps us connect to that oneness as we mark transitions or we move from one place to another. And this focus on transitions and the importance may also be judged from the fact that the very first Mishnah in the Oral Torah, the very first rabbinic question in this compendium of rabbinic commentary, begins with the question, from what time may the evening Shema, the Shema that we say at night, be read? From what time? What time can we start saying that Shema? And Rabbi Eliezer says, from when one can distinguish between sky blue and white. And then the Mishnah continues exploring a few other explanations. And then the Talmud picks up on this, further explores and saying, the Mishnah stated that the time for reciting the morning Shema begins when one can distinguish between sky blue and white. And the Talmud asks, okay, what is it? What is the difference between sky blue and white? And it goes through a bunch of explanations. And I offer this just to bring us back to where we started, that even in the Talmud, this text that is concerned so much with the specifics of practice and the precise timing and nuanced argumentation, I just love that the discussion about the Shema there concerns distinguishing various shades of blue in the sky in the early moments of dawn or of sunset, that the Shema here causes us to stop and to open up all of our senses and to slow down enough then to notice the differences between the various shades of blue as they streak across the sky. So just knowing that we want to recite the Shema and we can get very okay, what time? What's the exact time I should say it? But we can also transform that to saying wow, what exact color? Get really curious about the exact color of blue in the sky and let that lead us to when to say the Shema. So we recite the Shema, calling upon ourselves to know that even at the moment that we begin to be able to distinguish this from that, as this differentiation appears in the sky, and as we start to be able to differentiate objects as the sun is coming out or the sun is setting, we're again proclaiming Adonai Echad, the breath of God that moves through all life is one. So I think that's what I've prepared. Julie, you can stop sharing, I guess. I want to read all of the Torah that you have all put in chat because I'm sure there's amazing things here. And again, I'll say, you may have, we can open it up now for questions or also just, reflections or things that were prompted for you in hearing this and thinking about your own connection to this incredible prayer. Julie, I don't know if you want to say something here.
If folks have comments, I know some comments have come into the chat, and Adina, if you're able to address some of them. Someone asked if you could address briefly the V'ahavta, which is the first paragraph of the Shema, and the difference between heart and soul.
Wow, those are that feels like a deep philosophical question that I want to think about. But yeah, thank you for the question about the V'ahavta. I think we could have a whole nother class just on that. And to say that I absolutely love that the declaration of oneness that comes with the Shema leads into this, and you shall love. So the listening leads to oneness or some brief connection to the idea that there's some force that permeates everything that is one. And that leads us right into, and you shall love. And how do we love? And what are the particulars? What are the reminders that we can put throughout our lives, whether it's the mezuzah on our door or the tefillin, the phylacteries that some folks wrap around to put these prayers actually on their body. What are the reminders that we can have throughout our day to love and to actualize that love in real action?
Okay, anyone else have a question or comment?
I'm gonna look through here.
I know someone had asked in the beginning the name of the book that you showed right at the start.
Yeah, it's called My People's Prayer Book. And it is a series, so you can get individual books, but also there's books on the Shema, on the Amidah, on Moda'ani and the morning blessings, on Shabbat. In each one, it's really cool. They're laid out like pages of the Talmud, where there's the text of the prayer itself. I'll try to find a page to show you in the middle. And then commentaries all around. And then on further pages, sorry, I don't know if that is coming through so well, but on subsequent pages, like the further explanation of those commentaries. And there's feminist commentary and mystical and historical. So, you know, clearly today I'm presenting my own theology, and I think it's really helpful to look at books like this to see like multiple different ways that we might be able to look at and dissect and make meaning of these prayers, because all those different levels are relevant and important. Marilyn?
Hi, this was fabulous, absolutely fabulous, and the photos were magnificent. I have a couple of questions. You talked about Yisrael referring to Jacob and the struggle, but doesn't it also mean refer to the entirety of the Jewish people? I mean, once his name is changed and all that, because listening to Jacob is different than listening, you know, to God. And the other thing I wanted to say is I never really realized how important closing my eyes was, which I do instinctively, but it allows you to really listen and hear rather than if you have them open.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sometimes being able to close off or like let some of our other senses rest, allow the sense we want to focus on to sort of come to the fore. And Marilyn, I love your point about Yisrael, yeah, is like the entire people. So that we're saying not only to that part of self, that God wrestling part of self, but to each other, to all of us, calling in each other, especially when we say this prayer in community. Someone asked for the title of the book in the chat, so I'm putting that in, My People's Prayer Book. Great, Yossi, I see your hand.
Yes, Toda. I've never thought about Echad in the way that you were talking about it exactly, and it made me think that Echad also can be used to understand the Jewish people as a collective, and that collective sense of that one-to-one with God. You know, even in the Buber sense of what that means.
Beautiful. Thank you, Yossi. That's beautiful. Betsy, I see a question. I thought that the following sentence is part of the Shema. Could the rabbi talk about that sentence? Which sentence are you referring to, Betsy? Or if you want to put that in chat, I can try to address that. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, you know, I felt like there was just so much on these 6 words that I didn't want to go further, but yeah, we say Shema, and then we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is God's name. And traditionally that second line is recited quieter, except on Yom Kippur, traditionally when we say that line out loud, blessed is God's name. And I like thinking about, like, as we were talking about before, I mean, there's lots of meaning to read into that line, but just to offer one thing, that this name of God, blessed is this Shem Kavod of God, this Yod He Vav He, this breath name, this name that isn't pinned down to any one people or any one tradition, but is the name of breath of life that kind of moves through everything. Blessed is that name. Barbara, do you want to ask a question?
Yes. How do you explain it, like, to little children, 2 years old, what this prayer is about?
Yeah, maybe someone who, I have my own kids, but I'm certainly not an expert in child development.
No, but like when you're teaching them the Shema, like what are you telling them? How do you explain what you're teaching to them?
Yeah, I just focus on oneness and the breath, because I think that's something they can understand, that like I breathe, you breathe, the trees breathe. Even when we feel so separate from each other or from other people or from, like, there is something that connects us, and that is what God is, and that it's in everything. I don't know, but I would love to see in chat, like, especially if you're like an early childhood educator, or a seasoned parent, or just someone who thinks about this, like, what are ways that you explain this to children or get them to connect to it? I think I would say for my kids right now, especially for my 7-year-old who really likes routine and structure, just like, and I think this is how I was as a kid too, just having something that's like doable and memorizable that he can do each night is really, really helpful, to have like a routine. So that's another part of it. I think even before the words become meaningful or we know what we're saying, just being like, this is what I do to close my day, and it connects me to a deep part of my tradition and to my family, is important. And then the meaning can sort of evolve and change over time potentially. Bruce, did you want to offer something?
Yeah, we've said over and over how this is sort of the central prayer, the number one prayer you learn. If you know nothing else, you say the Shema, and I think we all agree about that. How much of that is an American thing? I mean, was that always true, or was that something that somehow evolved as another one of those American traditions of Judaism?
I can't speak to, there's definitely, which is so amazing, there's folks here from, like, I saw Bangkok and Switzerland and all over, and would love to hear sort of like, was the Shema emphasized in the way you were brought up? But I would say no, I think the Shema is sort of like foundational across all different cultures and expressions of Judaism around the world, because it is that prayer that we say twice a day. It is part of that deathbed prayer. It's what we're meant to say before bed. That isn't an American thing. That's part of Jewish tradition. And I think also because, I mean, obviously there are more paragraphs and more of the Shema, but just those 6 words are also just memorizable and internalizable. So I would guess that Jews all over the world probably, like, if they don't know anything or don't know any other prayers, know that. But I would love to hear from folks. I'm just looking to see if anyone. Yeah, I see. The Penny, there's a discussion about like the Jewish Pledge of Allegiance. I sort of think that is, at least for me in Hebrew school, I think that's how it was taught. I don't know if other folks had that experience, but it's like, we, as I said in my synagogue, we stand and say it. It's sort of like, yes, I believe in this God. And I think for me as a kid, it was like, as I said at the beginning, like, it's about one God, not many gods. And for me, that meaning has had to evolve over time so I could continue to find connection to this prayer. So I think that is one really meaningful, important strand of it. And I'm glad that there's others too. Yeah, thank you, Laura. I don't know if I mentioned that, but in the Ve'ahavta prayer itself, which comes after the Shema, is a part of this bigger Shema after these 6 words. It says you're to recite these words when you lie down and rise up. So we say that, and that's part of that is what instructs us to say this in the morning and in the evening. And we recite those words as part of the Ve'ahavta.